Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Lowkey Chaotic. At the beginning of my podcast journey, I released an episode called Do Straight Women Even Know What Good Sex Is? And it focused on the way we dissociate during sex, about the emotional absence, about things like how we're physically present but mentally slightly somewhere else, about how we're observing instead of fully feeling because straight people sex does not prioritize women's pleasure, and we internalize this and we focus on how we're being perceived and do I look good doing this? Am I moaning in an attractive way? Etc. etc. And a lot of women resonated with this episode, which is honestly no surprise. And I think many of us have experienced sex that didn't feel bad or wrong, but it also didn't feel amazing. Like there's a lot of women, me included, that have rarely had sex where you're like afterwards you were like, yeah, that was amazing. Cuz most of the time everything before is hot, like the foreplay, the making out, the cuddling, but the second it gets to the penetration, I don't really feel anything. You know what I mean? And this is kind of the norm for me, and I know for many other women out there as well. And we kind of talked about that in that episode from all those months ago. And now it's been so much time. I've learned so many new things. And I kind of realized that I was mainly analyzing the female experience of that dynamic in that episode, right? The dissociation, the performance, the emotional regulation. But I didn't fully ask the other half of the question, which is if women are often performing during sex, what are men performing? And even before we get to men, I think we should slow down and maybe sit with something that is very normalized, that I never really hear anybody talk about much because it's such a vulnerable thing. But hey, my whole shtick is being vulnerable on the internet, so here we go. But it's the fact that a lot of women have had sex where it, for example, literally starts hurting and you don't stop. Like, you know, when you're having sex with someone, you kind of like, I don't know, had sex with them 4 times in a row and it starts hurting, but instead of voicing that you're uncomfortable, you just keep going. Not because you were being forced to keep going, but because you don't want to make it awkward and you don't want to offend him and you don't want to disrupt the situation. So we act like we're fine and we just wait for it to be over. As bad as that fucking sounds, like literally. And we're just like focusing on regulating the moment and like maintaining the harmony and like protecting his ego and like, I don't know, emotionally manage the experience while our body is like still participating in it, you know? And I've been there, we've all been there, and it's such a quiet form of emotional labor during sex that we barely even recognize it as emotional labor because it doesn't look dramatic. It looks normal, it looks consensual, it looks fine. But internally, you are regulating the situation instead of fully embodying the experience. And that connects directly to what psychologists sometimes call spectator sex. This is a term I've only learned about recently. I'm surprised I didn't learn about it back then when I recorded that other episode because it fits perfectly into that whole episode. But spectator sex basically means you are not it describes basically what we just spoke about. You're not like fully inside the experience. You are partially observing yourself inside the experience. You're like monitoring, adjusting, thinking things like, am I reacting correctly? Is this going well? Should I say something? Should I not interrupt? So you're physically present, but mentally and emotionally slightly split. And for a long time, I thought this was just a women dissociation thing. However, if we are performing things such as we're performing comfort and harmony and emotional regulation during sex, then what are men performing? And as I continue to observe heterosexual dynamics, the one thing that stands out very strongly is that men often appear very controlled during sex, very contained, very silent. I mean, how often have you slept with a man and he just doesn't moan? My abusive ex, never fucking moaned, bro. It was so rare that he would moan. It was actually driving me fucking nuts. Like, what the fuck? I love it when men moan. I want to hear that you're having a good time. You know what I mean? It's so hot when people express vulnerability. And it, like, you know what I mean? Express enjoyment, express vulnerability. But anyways, in straight people sex, men are very often also very focused on stamina and on performance and on endurance. So they're not necessarily expressive in their pleasure and they're not necessarily vulnerable in their enjoyment. And I'm not saying that men don't feel pleasure. Of course they do. But the expression of pleasure is often so held back. And I think that that is so interesting psychologically because audible pleasure is vulnerable. Like that's expressive. That is emotionally revealing. You know what I mean? And if masculinity is socially associated with control and composure and dominance, then vulnerability during sex could subconsciously feel like a loss of control. So instead of expressing enjoyment, some men perform control. Like silence just becomes this form of composure, and composure becomes a form of masculinity, and masculinity becomes a performance. So if women are performing enjoyment to regulate the emotional atmosphere, and men are performing control to regulate vulnerability, then sex suddenly stops looking like two people just naturally being in the moment together, and it starts looking like two people unconsciously performing different roles that they were conditioned into. And the other day, my friend sent me a TikTok from this lady who was making very big claims about sex culture. And my reaction was not immediate agreement. It was more like, okay, these are big claims. Let's sit with them. I'm a fan of big claims. I'm a fan of generalizations because I think generalizations act as a tool to bring across a point more clearer. But I'm not a fan of big claims without getting into the why. You know what I mean? And her TikTok was very just big claim after big claim after big claim, but it wasn't getting into the depth of it all. I knew that there was some truth to the claims she was making, but the way it was, the whole TikTok was like formatted and formulized. I can't speak. Formulated. I don't know, it made me feel something. It made me feel something because I knew she was right about certain things, but then I just was like feeling frustrated at the way it was being expressed. But anyways, let's get into what she said because obviously it hit me enough to like now want to speak about it. She said something like, she mentioned the way the language we use around sex is extremely aggressive. Smash her, bang her, destroy her, crack. I fucking hate this cracking thing. That's like a new term that we coined recently because I've never heard about it until like 6 months ago. Hate it. Hate it so much. People keep saying, yeah, I want to crack tonight. I want to crack her. I want to, disgusting. But other terms, we also use hitting a lot. I want to hit that. And we rarely say things like, I shared an intimate experience with someone. We say things like, I got her and I smashed and like I scored. And that is not neutral language, right? That is achievement language. That is conquest language. That is winning language. And language shapes perception more than we like to admit. Because if the cultural vocabulary around sex is rooted in conquest metaphors, then the psychological framing of sex slowly shifts from mutual experience to achievement and acquisition. And this is where the whole conquest layer enters the conversation for me. Because, like, if you have sex, if sex is subconsciously framed as conquest, then control becomes success. Dominance becomes competence. Stamina becomes performance. And numbers become status. Not presence, not mutuality, not emotional attunement. And suddenly, this whole men not moaning thing becomes a lot less random, because conquering is emotionally safer than connecting, and control is emotionally safer than vulnerability, and performance is emotionally safer than embodiment. And then we have like a whole nother layer, which is porn, which is also something another TikTok this lady made that my friend sent me. Because like she was talking about how a lot of mainstream straight porn exists to normalize women's pain. Because a lot of the time in straight people porn, women sound like they're in pain. I mean, that's why I cannot watch most straight people porn. I don't enjoy it. Moaning is such a big thing to me. Like if someone doesn't sound like they're having a good time and they don't look like they're having a good time, I can't watch it. And that's what most straight people porn is. It's women looking like they're not enjoying themselves. They sound like they're in pain. They're absolutely exaggerating, and you can just tell that they're just like not having fun, like at all. It looks like a performance, it sounds like a performance, and it sounds like pain, and it's just not like fun to watch or observe whatsoever. And so I can rarely ever watch straight people porn. And I feel like the sounds women make, it very often doesn't sound like genuine, embodied enjoyment. It sounds high-pitched and strained and painful and exaggerated. And also in like straight people porn, I feel like the visual dynamic is very often super intense. It's not giving two people that are in this moment together. It's giving this is sex that's being done to her. And it's giving two people in a role. You know what I mean? And I feel like I'm not trying to make like a moral argument about porn right now. I'm just making like a psychological observation about the modeling of it. And if someone grows up consuming sexual content where women perform exaggerated pleasure and men remain controlled and dominant, and intensity is prioritized over emotional attunement, then that becomes an unconscious template for what sex is supposed to look like. I mean, I, in my life, have never watched a porn video where two people were like being shown, communicating, hey, do you like this? Is this what you like? You know what I mean? It's like most straight people porn is just the dude absolutely fucking the living shit out of her and like destroying her and her looking like she's not having a good time, and it just going on for way too long, and I can just like, I just feel for her, and I just want to jump into the fucking screen and like tear them apart. That's how like much straight people porn, like that's how much I feel for women, for the porn actresses in straight people porn, because it's not giving you're having a good time. And I know you're not. You know, I know you're just getting through it because this is your job, and that's horrible. But anyways, when you combine things such as aggressive language and like conquest framing and porn modeling and gendered emotional conditioning, you get a very specific cultural script. Women, for us, that script is don't offend, don't interrupt, don't make it awkward, maintain the harmony, regulate the emotional atmosphere, endure the discomfort silently if necessary. And for men, it's things like stay in control, don't appear vulnerable, perform stamina, perform dominance, maintain composure. And if both people are following scripts instead of fully being present, then the experience can look normal externally, but feel emotionally absent internally. Which brings me back to the core distinction that has been sitting in my mind this entire time: presence versus performance. Not good sex versus bad sex, not moral versus immoral, but are you fully embodied and mutually present, or are you unconsciously performing roles? Because performing pleasure is not the same thing as feeling pleasure, and performing masculinity is not the same as expressing enjoyment. Performing sex is not the same thing as having a shared experience. And I only truly understood that difference when I experienced sex that felt mutual with the last guy that I was seeing. It didn't feel like a man that was like doing something to me. It felt like we were actually together in the experience for the most part. I mean, it wasn't some magically different experience. There were moments where I was doing what I had been conditioned into believing I should do during sex. And there were moments where I was observing myself versus actually immersing in the experience. But for the most part, it felt like something we were actually in together, observing each other, responding to each other, communicating, and like being present, right? And the emotional difference when I compare the sex with the last guy that I was seeing to like the guy I slept with in summer of 2024, or like all the sex with my ex, it was enormous. Because in like performative dynamics, you feel like you're an experience being had by someone else. You know what I mean? And in like mutual dynamics, you feel experienced as a person. And that distinction really stayed with me, which is also why this whole like body count conversation is so interesting to me, actually, because I don't view body count as a moral purity metric, but it's like body count to me is like information about somebody's relationship to sex. And since culturally, men are rewarded for sexual conquest and for numbers and accumulation and they're seen as like they have experience. If they have more experience, the higher their status, whatever. When someone has a very high body count, aka when men have high body counts, I don't automatically think that they're a bad person. But I think like, why? What is your relationship to sex? Do you like connecting with people? Do you enjoy the stimulation? Do you like feeling validated by other men? Is it conquest? And I think that like, even if a man is kind and emotionally intelligent and present, a very high body count, like it's something I could look past. Like if I know you're a good person and we're in the middle of falling in love, I will look past your body count. But there's still a part of me that feels uncomfortable about it. Not because I'm judging him by it, or like I'm not judging his worth, but it's just because I personally associate extremely high body counts with a mindset that I just can't relate to. Like for me, sex is deeply tied to presence and emotional mutuality and energetic investment. So when sex becomes frequent and casual and numerous, my brain interprets that as a different rhythm of intimacy, if you will. And I've even asked myself, like, is this conditioning? Is that bias? Am I projecting? And maybe partially, but I feel like I'm not afraid of sex. I feel like I'm afraid of interchangeability, because I feel like if sex is framed culturally as conquest and conquest is about accumulation, then people can slowly become experiences in a list instead of a unique relational encounter. And that creates a very specific emotional fear inside of me that I've expressed on this podcast many times. Am I being deeply experienced, or am I just another experience? Am I a person in the moment or a chapter in someone's narrative of conquest? When I was researching for this episode earlier, I saw a Reddit thread where a man literally described sex as a competitive ego game with his friends, trying to see who could sleep with more people in a month. He like posted a Reddit thread and was like, how can I stop seeing sex as conquest? And then explained his situation, and he was like, it's not even about the women anymore, it's about filling my ego. And I felt like that was such a brutally honest reflection of conquest, of the conquest framing, that it almost like, I don't know, it just confirmed everything that I kind of, it's just nice when I'm like understanding the world of something, and then you like do research and you hear people's experiences and it just confirms the speculation. You know what I mean? So when I zoomed out, this entire conversation, this is not about judging men. It's not about judging women. It's not about moralizing sexuality. It's about how cultural scripts and language and modeling and conquest coded framing can subtly transform sex into performance instead of presence, right? And maybe the quiet discomfort we feel is not prudishness. I don't think that I was once in a situation where a man called me prude. I don't see myself as prude. I'm quite sexual. I would consider myself like a sexual person, and I love sex. And when I'm involved with someone, I like having a lot of sex. But I think it's just, if I hold back or I feel uncomfortable or whatever, it's not because I'm prude. It's because my body is sensing the difference between being mutually present and being part of a performed dynamic shaped by control and conquest and emotional regulation. And I think once you see that distinction, it's super difficult to unsee. And I feel like this awareness, when you start noticing when you're reacting instead of feeling, when you notice that you're regulating instead of expressing, when you notice that your body is there, but your mind is managing the situation, that is super uncomfortable. It is hard to have the courage to speak up and say something. Like in those situations that I've been in, the last situation I've been in, when I was going through that, where I was in pain, but I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to hurt his ego and disrupt the situation, etc., etc. It is so much easier to sit with the physical pain and just wait for it to be over than to speak up and just say that this hurts and can we stop, because it puts you in this position of, oh my God, am I gonna offend him? Is he gonna feel offended and hurt? And am I hurting his ego, and is that going to lead to him rejecting me and him not wanting me anymore? And so you sit in this pain because that is easier than speaking up. And that is fucking crazy. And it's also so stupid because of course I didn't choose to sleep with a man that would ever get offended at such thing. I already am in a place where I'm choosing people that I sleep with that are good people. So the fact that even when I'm sleeping with a good person, that doesn't automatically diminish this like conditioned fear just shows how much power these things have over us. And it is so fucking interesting. So fucking interesting. And I feel like culturally, we frame sex in very binary terms, whether it's good or bad, and whether it's empowering or not, and like healthy or unhealthy. But we rarely talk about present versus performative. And those two experiences, like I mentioned, can look so identical on the surface because two people can be having completely consensual sex and still be slightly performing, slightly regulating, and observing themselves, not because they're fake, but because they were socialized into roles. And I think that realization actually softens the conversation for me because it stops this whole like men are doing this and women are doing that, and becomes we are all navigating scripts that we didn't consciously write. Some people perform control, some people perform comfort, some people perform dominance, while others perform pleasure. And underneath all of that, there is still a body trying to feel safe and present and connected. And maybe that's why the distinction between being experienced as a person and being used as an experience feels so emotionally significant to me, because presence requires mutual awareness and mutual responsiveness and embodiment, whereas performance only requires you to fulfill a role. And I think for me personally, this entire reflection made me realize that like my discomfort was never really about sex itself. It was never about numbers and morality. It was about emotional presence. It was about feeling like the moment is shared and not performed, and that it is mutual and embodied, not observed from a distance. And I mean, when I talk about body counts, I don't want people to think that I'm some judgmental bitch that cares if someone has a high body count. Not at all. But it just triggers something uneasy in me because it just makes me feel like I am disposable to you. Like, does this mean the same thing to you as it does to me? And maybe there's also just a little bit of like a lifestyle and capacity difference in there, because I can't relate to people that are sexually active with a lot of different connections at the same time. I mean, I fucking struggle just going grocery shopping and seeing my friends every week. Like, how the fuck do you have the capacity to go on 30 dates in a year that then also like those dates then lead to sex? That is just like something I just can't relate to, and thus I can't understand it. And it's just more like this, I don't know, it might be a lifestyle capacity thing that I'm not getting, but it's mainly also just a value mismatch. But that doesn't mean that I'm saying that there's something wrong with it. And I think it's me kind of like trying to also manage the emotional risk, because even though I would be open to falling in love with someone that has a high body count, ideally though, I would fall in love with someone that doesn't have a high body count, because then that's me emotionally regulating the risk, because then I'm going into a situation with someone where I don't have to ask myself these anxiety inducing questions like, do I mean something to you? Is this just another fucking Tuesday? Or does the sex actually matter? Etc., etc. And I love that I am learning so much about life and myself, and I'm sharing all of this with you guys online. But I wonder if it's even possible to apply all of these learnings. Like, I don't know. it would be nice if we could get to a place where this awareness turns into change and action. Like, are we going to all get to a place where we stop asking ourselves, oh, was this good sex? And we start asking ourselves, was I present? Were we present? Or were we both just playing roles that we learned to play somewhere along the way? And that is a much more uncomfortable question, but a so much more honest one. Because once you feel the difference between mutual presence and performance, our bodies remember that. And it becomes harder to settle for experiences that feel emotionally distant, even if they look perfectly normal on the outside. And I think that's where I'm landing with this episode. Not with a conclusion, not with a rule, not with moral stance, but with like a question. How much of what we call normal intimacy is actually presence, and how much of it is performance shaped by culture, language, and unconscious scripts? And what would sex feel like if both people were allowed to be fully present instead of fully composed? And I mean, this whole topic has like sparked so much more interest in me, and there's like so many layers to this that I don't think we can even barely come close to covering in an episode. But I really am so motivated to learn all about this now, because one of the main questions that I'm now asking myself after learning about all of this is like, when the fuck did conquest even enter sexuality? Has it always been this way? How did porn culture contribute to evolving it? Is this linked to war and colonization and biology? I mean, I have so many questions. I'm definitely going to learn about it all. I don't know if it makes sense to share these learnings on here, because I know that this is more of like a personal insights reflection podcast and not like a history lesson podcast, but I don't know. I'm just really trying to be in this like, I don't know, I'm really just trying to tap into who I was as a kid. As a kid, so many things interested me, and I always put so much effort into learning about so much stuff. So I really am just trying to bring that back. But anyways, I love you guys. That was it for today. You know where to find me, Lowkey Chaotic Podcast everywhere. And I'll see y'all next week.